Hello and welcome to Unit 4, which is Advanced Form Creation. And what I've done is I've pulled up an instructor data form. Now there's a number of different ways that you can go into it, and the text goes into creating a form from basics and things along those lines. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at how to mess about with the form that's already created and go through a number of different items and different steps. So what I've done is I've already created an instructor data form, which is right here, and if I change my view and I go to my design view, I can then click on, as soon as I go to my design view, I have a section up here where I have the detail. Let's say, for instance, my instructor data is too big. If I want to make that smaller, I can come along, change it, move instructor data here, and if I want to change the name, I can change it to instructor information. Now that is considered to be a label. It's not bound, meaning it's not connected to anything, and so as a result I can modify the actual way it looks. I can do things like this. Let's say, for instance, I didn't want to display the instructor ID because that is something that is private for whatever reason. I can come along and I can highlight this and I can delete that. And if I wanted to do something, let's say I wanted to come along and I wanted their name to be there, just their name itself, I can come along and I can put I can change this to instructor name, right? So there we go. And then I've got the first name and last name. And then I have my education, and I can put that up here, and I can do some alignment with it. Let's say my education is pretty long for whatever reason. I can extend that out, right? So there we are. And then my phone number, I can bring that up here. Notice each one of these, there's two different sections. I have the label, which is over here to the left, and then I have the actual contents of the field, which is over here. And the neat thing about it is I can add things to it if I so choose. So let's say, for instance, I wanted to create a calculated field or a field that was already made for me. So I wanted to add a label. So I made sure, here's my design. I've got my labels. I'm going to create one, and I'm just going to call this instructor name. Okay? So there we go. So there's my instructor name. It's probably this is a new label. It's not associated with a control. Outstanding. And if I come along and let's see instructor name, and then I want to create a control, which is right here, meaning it's going to be based on something else, it's going to create the text box and another label. If I wanted to have the label and the text box connected to one another, so when I move the text box itself, it should move the label that's associated with it. Awesome, I can do that. If I want them to be independent, all I have to do is delete just the label, and now I have a free-floating label here, which is instructor name, and what it's bound to right here. Let's say, for instance, I wanted to come along, and the name is going to be TX12. I'm going to call this TXT instructor full name, right? And the reason I do that is so if I'm looking at a list of names, or I'm looking at a list of boxes or whatever, I can see what it is. Then if I come in and I see this control source, now I can click on that, and if I hit the down drop arrow of control source, I see all the things that are in the table associated that this particular form is associated with. So if I wanted to add multiple, I can add more forms to it later, but right now, all the items that are associated with that particular form are right there. Instructor ID, first name, last name, education, phone number. Now, if I want to create a calculated field, what I can do is I can click this right here. This will then allow me to create a field. So for instance, right here, if I have first name, so I click on first name, and then I do and space, or quote space here, and last name. And these are, once again, I'm just kind of giving you some general hints here, some not hints, more like tips. So this is the first name, meaning it's supposed to get the information as it runs from the first name field. It's going to take whatever the first name field is. Ampersand is a concatenation of strings. It's going to concatenate that with a space, and then it's going to concatenate that with the last name. Now, a lot of you know that when you're alphabetizing things, you don't want to put things into your table with full name, because full name is almost improbable to actual, or almost impossible to sort later on, because then if it's your full name, you've got to figure out where's the last name. I got to parse out the last name and things along those lines. So people usually keep first name and last name separate. But you can create a field that has first name and last name. So I'm going to push OK here, and now when I run this, it should say first name and last name. So I'm going to view back to my data sheet. Notice I've got Bob and I've got Sebastian, and it says Bob Sebastian right here. So what I can do, if I like the way that, notice I tested it first, I can then come along, I can go to my design view, I can take these two fields out, delete them, come along in here, grab this bad boy here, and then move it up here. So when we look at these forms, as we go through them, each one of the names are just going to be Bob Sebastian. Or Sally Skip Along, Doorknob, Bob Nark, each one of them, right? The problem with that is a form, and this is something that you have to be concerned with, a form is usually a way to input data. By changing and putting these two together, if I go to a new form and I create a new record, this instructor data is actually tied to the instructor data table here. So though I can enter in the two pieces of information here, it can't tie that back to its source. So as a result, I've basically disabled the ability to put in a brand new name. Which is fine because I wanted to demonstrate it. But I also demonstrated kind of a drawback to it, as it were. So I can always, go to my design view, right click, go to my design view, hit my down drop arrow, go to my design view that way. Now let's say, for instance, I'm going along and I decide, you know what, I want to add in more fields that I've taken away. If I click, there's a property sheet right here, and there's add existing fields. If I click on add existing fields, all the tables that are associated, all the fields that are associated with this particular form, because it's linked to a certain table, is shown. Now I can click show all tables, and that'll give me all the different tables. So here's my class table with all the items associated with class table. Here's my budget with all the different items associated with the budget. There's that. Though when you start adding fields from different tables that aren't that don't have a relationship, you can cause some issues where that's concerned. That's a different section. But this at least gives you an idea of where to find that data. You can also do things like, you also do things like click here, and if I close my field list and I want to open up my property sheet, you'll see right here where it says record source, right? So I'll move this here. Record source, it says instructor data. If I click that down drop arrow, look at all the different instructor sources I can get. So now I've got my different tables, and this is why we have like instructor data, class table, and budget. You'll notice for the naming conventions, if I would go in right here, I might call this, and this is where some 3-letter extensions, which apparently I wasn't paying a lot of close attention when I did this. For instance, I'm looking at the list. Let's say I can't see this list over here. If my tables are called TBL class, TBL instructor data, TBL class, TBL budget, things along those lines, I automatically know that those 3 are tables. For all the queries, if I come along and I do query, QRY, followed by like instruct num all query, instruct num query, instruct pay, but each one of them start with QRY, then I know when I'm looking at this list, and then the word query would be redundant, then when I'm looking at this list, I'll know exactly what they are. And that's where that 3-letter designator starts to come into play. Reports are usually RPT, forms are usually FRM, queries are usually QRY, tables are usually TBL, and then if you have different types of queries, you can designate the different types of queries. If it's a join query, you could do QRY join or something along those lines. But it makes it super easy when you see a list of what to actually deal with, right? So those are those particular items, and once again, if I change my record source, I can add in different fields. If I come along and I choose add existing fields, and if I want to add, let's say, the last name and first name back, I just double click on first name, double click on last name, and they're back right there. If I want to, once again, if I want to delete those, I can just come along and delete them, things along those lines. If I get join queries, if it's based off a join query, it might ask us data when we run our form and things along those lines. But the forms gives you a lot of flexibility in the way of filtering things out, modifying what it is. I could put a picture in here. I could get in some intricacies of having calculated fields. So if I'm looking at the budget table with a budget value, if I want to divide it over years, I can take whatever that budget is and divide over months. I can take whatever budget that is and divide it over months in the same way that I created first name and last name. So I have a lot of flexibility in what I want to create. And that's just kind of a touchdown on your advanced forms, and gives you enough tools combined with what the text was telling you to kind of give you a heads up where that's concerned. Well, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Feel free to continue to post them. And also, if we need to get to create a direct instruction lesson that kind of helps you along with some of these things, by all means, let me know. Either way, keep up the good work. It's been a good class so far. Thank you.